Hey guys, after a day or two of reading these stories, it sparked something that happened to me quite a few years ago. I haven't told anybody the complete context of this story, only a summarized version to a few people, but it haunted me as a kid. If you are in for a good, wow, that's screwed up, read or listen, you're in for it. What you're about to read or hear is 100% true, so I will begin. It was back when I was about 10 years old, 17 now, and I was walking to my friend's house. It was on a Saturday around noon, and my friend lived about a 5-minute, if not less, walk from my house. About halfway through the walk, a rainstorm came out of nowhere. Being 10 years old and just wanting to get to my friend's house, I decided against running back for a jacket. When I reached the street off of my friend's street, an inconspicuous white van pulled up beside me. The sliding door swung open, and a lady in her early 30s asked me if I wanted a ride, as it was obviously raining out and I had no jacket. Being a very safe kid, I told her I was going to a friend's house just up the street and that I was fine, to which she insinuated that I had to get in with them and that they would drive me there. A little backstory on the van. In my southern Ontario city at the time, there were constant news reports of, and I kid you not, a white van abducting numerous children, and actually I believe one of the children believed to be abducted by this van was actually killed. The van was described as a white Dodge Caravan, and I always remembered this because it was the same type of van my mom drove, but she drove a blue one. Anyways, back to the story. So, as I told the van I was fine, the remembrance of the story of the white van sparked to my mind. The van was known by the locals as Old Grump, as an elderly man with a forwards ball cap was always seen driving it. And I was absolutely mortified when I looked toward the driver's seat to see an old man with a ball cap at the wheel. I'm even getting chills thinking about this right now, let alone being alone on a street with these creeps in front of me. When I noticed the old man, I remembered more details of the van, the obstructed or non-existent plates. Considering I was about 2 feet from the back of the van, I glanced to look at the license plates, which were obscured by a garage bag. The total time elapsed between the van pulling up, me saying no, the lady trying to get me inside, and the realization of the situation was probably around 45 seconds. When I realized what could possibly happen, I told her I really had to go. I darted out of there. I've never moved so fast in my entire life. As I began to run, I heard the lady curse. Shit. And the door came slamming shut. The van began to accelerate again, but luckily for me, after cutting across a few lawns, I was maybe 20 meters away from my friend's house. As I reached my friend's house, I recall jumping over the water runoff between his and his neighbor's house and coming to the porch staircase. Now, most houses in my area have maybe 2 to 4 steps and then their front door. But my friend, living in a condo, had about 15 steps, with the door being about 2 meters off of the ground. I sped up the steps as fast as I could, pounded on his door and looked through the glass and saw him slowly walking towards the door. At this point I was screaming, "Cody, open the door," and then turned around to see the van just arriving across the street, maybe 2 doors down, in a suburban neighborhood, so maybe 50 feet away. My friend perked up and bolted towards the door, quickly unlocked it, and I rushed inside. To save some time, I summarized the story to him. We were both 10 years old and just intended on an afternoon of playing some Tom and Jerry style Street Fighter on PS2 when this whole ordeal happened. We panicked and didn't know what to do. His parents weren't home, nor were mine, and we wouldn't dare go outside to fetch help from the neighbors. We were on the border of calling the police. This is where it gets real messed up. We picked up the phone, but the line was dead. No calling the police. I know it sounds BS, but the area was only a few months old, so the phone and internet was extremely unpredictable, and with the now harsh weather, it was no surprise that the line went dead. We lay down on his living room floor. It hid us from plain sight and allowed us to look out the front window, and began peering outside with a pair of mini binoculars he had in his room. We always used to play army outside and stuff, so even though the circumstances were life-threatening, we wanted an excuse to use the binoculars. My friend handed them to me, and I brought them to my eyes. I looked outside, and to my surprise, nobody was in the van anymore. Completely empty. I handed them to my friend, and he stopped his breathing. I remember whispering, "What is it, dude? What, man?" And then before he answered, banging began on the garage door. Dead serious. We almost pissed ourselves. I was also on the verge of crying. My buddy Cody was frozen solid, and we didn't know what to do. Considering it was a condo, the garage was in close proximity to where we were. The living room, 15 feet from the front door, so we could hear everything. We heard the handle on the garage being fumbled with, so we grabbed kitchen knives and proceeded down the stairs silently. When we got to the bottom of the first flight of stairs, Cody remembered in a moment of panic that his dad's, I believe uncle, lived in the bottom flat of the condo and was possibly home. We pushed open his door and began calling out his name, Brian, but he wasn't there. We were petrified but felt a sense of security because we had 2 kitchen knives and Cody was a black belt in karate and kicked the shit out of kids twice his size. With our knives, we proceeded into the garage. Scared, my heart was racing so fast that these creeps might hear it. We silently listened to the noises outside from the garage, communicating in gestures. The attempts to gain access to the house were sporadic and occurred over a time frame of maybe 20 minutes. Eventually, everything ceased. I held my breath and my heart stopped beating so fast. After about 20 seconds of staring at the garage handle, we heard a single word. Dang. It was the voice of a man, and that single word rung through my ears like a bullet and caused me to not sleep for nights on end. After standing there in shock and fear, afraid to move, we gathered the courage to make our way back upstairs. A few minutes later, there was a ring at the door. My heart dropped and I'm almost certain that my nuts did too. We proceeded cautiously with our knives in hand. When we peered through the peephole, we saw Rogers, telephone company here in Canada, worker at the door with a clipboard. We opened up the door and bombarded this guy with questions, eventually amounting to asking if he was the one trying to enter the house. He wasn't. The van started up and left. Okay, so this is a story that happened to me when I was somewhere around the age of 12 or 13. I believe it was my best friend Anna's 13th birthday, but I could be mistaken. Regardless, that puts the year this happened around 2003 or 2004. I had known Anna since kindergarten. We had gone to elementary school together for several years, but then she moved to the other side of town when her mom remarried. So we only saw each other on special occasions. When my mom would drive me across town to spend the night. Now, this house was a weird house. It was in a pretty upscale neighborhood. A gated community, if I remember correctly, but the entire area outside of the immediate neighborhood was sort of crap. For reference, this was in the San Bernardino area of California. Beyond that, Anna's stepdad was a total creep. He used to make sexual references around all of us young girls, and I'm pretty sure he was physically abusive to my friend's mom. Not to mention, he was generally unpleasant to be around. He just seemed to get angry at the drop of a hat. While this isn't 100% relevant to what happened, it helps you get an idea of the overall atmosphere of the household. Anyway, so cue the night of the birthday party. I always felt like the odd one out. Anna had made a ton of new friends at her middle school, and they all knew each other pretty well. There were about 10 of us in total, I think. So I had to try pretty hard to be involved in these sleepovers, or I would end up in the corner alone. Early on in the night, while Anna's mom and stepdad were still awake, it was a typical birthday cake and balloons and singing sort of party. Meanwhile, however, Anna's new friends were cooking up what we should all do when the parents went to bed. In excited whispers, some of the girls started telling me about how they had invited 2 of the boys from their school to stop by around 1 a.m. They had promised to meet them at the side yard gate and let them in through the back door so as not to draw the attention of Anna's parents. Both of the guys were super cute, they promised me, and I wouldn't be disappointed. We played it cool until Anna's parents went to bed a little bit before midnight, and then it became a waiting game. As the hour drew closer, the girls started debating who would go outside to meet the guys. It quickly became evident that although it seemed like a good idea at the time, most of the girls were still a bit scared of going outside in the dark alone. Wanting to fit in and gain some respect from Anna's new friends, I volunteered to go. Anna agreed to join, as well as Brandy, who was the one who invited the boys to meet us in the first place. Quietly as we could, we opened the sliding glass door and crept into the backyard. I think it must have been a full moon because I remember it seemed super bright for 1 in the morning. Anna's yard was pretty small and empty. We crept, giggling to ourselves, over to the wooden side gate and peeked into the front yard. Somebody was sitting on the curb. I remember I could see them quite clearly, despite the nearest streetlight being a couple houses away. They were facing away from us, hunched over with their knees pulled close to their body. It looked like they were waiting for something. Their hair appeared sparse and wispy, and they wore what looked like a gray wool suit. To top off of this strange sight, a strange briefcase sat next to them on the curb. I was instantly overcome by a sinking feeling in my stomach. Something wasn't right. This wasn't who we were expecting that was described to me. That was for certain. For what felt like a long moment, nobody said anything. We just stood peering over the fence. Then I heard Brandy's voice behind me speaking in a loud whisper so as to not alert Anna's parents. "Josh, Eric, is that you?" For the briefest of moments, I thought the stranger had not heard her. They remained with their backs turned to us, facing the empty street. Then slowly but deliberately, they twisted at the waist to stare directly at us. It became clear that it was a man, but much older than anybody we were looking for. His eyes were incredibly wide, almost circular, but the rest of his face was expressionless. For a moment we all stared. Then the stranger rose to his feet and began walking towards us across the front lawn. But it was not a normal walk at all. Imagine somebody power walking as fast as they possibly could without running, so that it almost looks robotic. That was how he walked, beside me. Anna managed a few words. "Run." The three of us bolted for the sliding glass door at the back of the house, not daring to turn back to see if he was hopping the gate. We whipped it open, much to the alarm of the other girls, and fumbled with the lock behind us. There were no curtains to shield us from the dark backyard, so we dragged everybody into the kitchen and sat on the floor. There we described to the others what we had seen. "Are you sure it wasn't just Josh playing a trick on you?" one of the girls asked skeptically. "Positive," Brandy replied. She started to say something else, but her words were cut short. Boom, boom, boom. Several of the girls shrieked. Somebody was at the front of the house, pounding on the large living room window. Not knocking, mind you, but literally pounding. They were obviously hitting the window with full force. Then we heard it again. "What do they want?" one of the girls whispered. None of us knew. Once more we heard it. After the third set of knocks, there was a long and very tense silence. I think most of us were terrified that he would hop the gate and come around to the sliding door, which aside from being uncovered was also fairly easy to unlock. After a couple of minutes of silence, Anna leaped to her feet. "I'm going to get my stepdad," she declared. Several of us worked up the courage to follow her to the foot of the stairs. Despite it being close to both the front door and the window, both of which thankfully have curtains, her stepdad was already standing at the top of the stairs, totally perplexed, with her mom lurking behind him. "What the heck are you girls doing?" he asked. All at once, we clamored to explain that there was a strange man outside, that he had been sitting on the curb but ran at us when he saw us, and that just now he had been pounding on the window. "I'm getting my gun," the stepdad said, and he emerged a few minutes later with a shotgun. We all waited with bated breath as he unlocked the door and stepped out front. There were a few moments of silence as he looked around, and then he came back inside and locked the door behind him, clearly annoyed. "There's no one out there. Now keep it down, I've got work in the morning," he said. There was no arguing with him, but needless to say, none of us slept much that night. By the following morning, some of the girls were trying to justify it, speculating that one of the boys they invited might have sent a family member as a prank, but that just never made any sense to me. No normal late middle-aged or elderly man would agree to terrorize a bunch of little girls unless he was already a twisted weirdo to begin with. Years later, I made the connection that we were incredibly close to Patton State Hospital, as in within reasonable walking distance, which is a pretty massive mental institution, but I don't know if there were any escapes that year. The most reasonable explanation is that it was somebody on drugs, I suppose, but it was terrifying no matter who they were, especially considering the suit and briefcase get-up. What was up with that? Following that night, I don't recall ever spending the night at Anna's again, but I think it was more because her stepfather was a jerk and my mom didn't want me around him anymore. Anna's mom and stepfather divorced a few years later, and Anna moved out of state. I never saw any of her friends again. And while we've kept in touch, we don't talk much about our childhood, and we never discuss what happened that night. I thought about bringing it up, but I also worry it might bring back other painful memories of everything going on with her stepfather at that time. So, I don't know if that would be appropriate. Anyways, thank you guys for taking the time to read this, or listen. It was an interesting experience typing it out, as I've only ever told it out loud before, and very rarely. We moved into a house in the country about 4 months ago. Since we'd previously lived in an apartment, that means we need to buy a lawnmower. Instead of spending $200 plus on a lawnmower when we have to move in a few years, we decided to hire somebody to cut our grass. Initially, we went with a guy that my fiance used to work with, but $65 every 2 weeks starts to add up, and I was looking for something cheaper. That brings me to Charles. Charles posted in my Facebook classified that he was looking for some lawns to cut this weekend and had a reputable company, so I sent him a message. Initially, Charles came off as nice. He asked for my address so he could stop by and give me an estimate. After stopping by my house, he sent me a message saying, "Damn, you got a big porch." I told him my off days, but he assured me I didn't have to be home. I told him to come Wednesday. Wednesday morning, he messaged me, "Are you home?" I said no. 3 hours later, "Are you home yet?" I told him no, I won't be home till after 8. Charles then informed me that his tire had a flat and he would come tomorrow. Thursday. First thing in the morning, he messaged me, "Will you be home today?" I told him no. He messages back a few hours later, "Hey, are you home?" "No. I told you I wouldn't be home all day. Are you still coming out?" He then told me his truck broke down. He was sending messages like, "Please don't be upset with me, sweetheart." At this point, I was getting really creeped out. I told him just to come tomorrow. Friday, it's actually my off day, but I woke up and left the house for the day. He messages me, "Hey, I'm coming. You're off today, right?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm not home." "When will you be home?" "I don't know." He messaged me later saying, "Sorry, babe. I was loading the equipment onto my truck and it fell and broke. Maybe I can come tomorrow." At this point, I was really creeped out and I told him, "Never mind, I'm going to find somebody else." Saturday, I get off work around 4 or 5 and check my phone and find multiple messages from him saying that he has cut my grass and I need to come home and give him the money. I told him, "No, I'll cash app it to you." He started getting really irate and saying that I need to give him the cash now. I told him I would give him the money after I got home and saw the grass was cut. I was honestly really worried he would be waiting at my house, so I got a friend to drive home behind me. He wasn't there and I sent him the money and I thought that was the end of it. Fast forward to about 2 months later, I'm on the phone with my fiance as I drive to class and he tells me he has to get off the phone because there's somebody walking down our driveway. I asked what he meant and he said there was a man walking around in our driveway and front yard. After I got to class, he texted me telling me it was just a man who had come by to promote his lawn care business. I didn't think anything about it as it had been 2 months, but later that night I got home and saw a business card laying on my counter with the name of the man who had been messaging me earlier. I called my fiance Mike at work and asked how the guy had been acting. He said Charles seemed genuinely surprised that a man had come out and asked if he lived alone. I asked Mike if the man had stopped at any other houses and he replied, "Now that I think about it, I don't think so." After he left our house, he just left. Mike said he seemed really desperate to help around the house and offered to cut the lawn, fix our porch, remove any trash or scrap metal we had around the house, and then asked if we had pests such as bats in our attic or anything. That especially freaked me out as we do have a bat problem and I had previously posted about it on Facebook. Mike then said that was really weird was Charles was very freaked out about the dog. He heard Max barking from inside and started asking a lot of questions like, is he big? Does he stay outside or inside? Does he ever go outside or does he stay inside completely, and how big is he? Is he nice? Mike chalked it up to him being scared of dogs. He gave him a brief tour of the outside of the house and then Charles got in his truck and left. I then told Mike that this was the same guy who had been messaging me earlier in the year and Mike began to freak out. He said that Charles had asked a lot of really specific questions about who all lived here, how long they had lived here, where they were at the time. He said he tried to brush them off, but Charles seemed really insistent on knowing if Mike was the only one in the house. Before he left, Mike specifically asked him if he had cut the lawn here before or something and was maybe thinking of the last owners. But Charles told him, "No, I just happened to be out this way and thought I'd promote my business in the neighborhood." The worst part, I had taken my fiance's car to work that day, which means my car was in the driveway when Charles dropped by. He thought I was home alone. I didn't contact the police because I thought I might be overreacting. This all happened 2 days ago, and I really hope I never have to see him again. After I graduated high school, I moved to a small city in southern Ontario, Canada, called Kitchener. I hated the idea of living in residence since I am not the most social person, so I moved into a house with 2 friends from home and 2 other guys that were already living in the house. I am a very independent person, so I thoroughly enjoyed having my own bedroom and bathroom. At this point, my boyfriend and I had been together for a year, and he wanted us to move in together. However, I refused. I love him, but I need my own space, and a lot of it sometimes. A couple weeks into the school year, I was invited to go out to a house party, not far from my house. I don't typically like going to parties because of my anxiety. I get very anxious being around a large number of people, but I decided to go and be a little social with some fellow classmates. I have not always got along with my fellow females. I find many of them exhausting to be around, so my main group of friends consists of mostly guys. I spend the majority of my time chatting with the guy I knew from my classes, Alan. He is similar to me in a few ways, and we bonded over a mutual love of the Legend of Zelda series. I noticed he brought another male companion with him to this house party. I didn't notice him hanging around at first, but eventually I felt his eyes burning a hole into me, and it made me a bit uncomfortable. I tried to be friendly and introduce myself to him, but he didn't say anything. I shrugged it off and just figured he was shy. When the guy that was there with Alan left for the bathroom, Alan apologized for his friend's behavior. "I'm sorry about Sean. He is actually a buddy's brother. He doesn't have a lot of friends, so I said he could come along. I reassured him that there was no reason for him to apologize. I could relate to Sean on that level and felt a little bit of sympathy for him. Throughout the night, Sean's behaviors did not change. Even when I was not around Alan, Sean would always stick at least 6 feet behind me, always staring after me. I felt it was time for me to leave, which I felt quite relieved about, thinking this should fill my social quota for the next couple of months. My boyfriend doesn't like the idea of me walking home alone, especially this late at night. He had to work early, so he could not walk me home. So Alan offered to take the walk since he knows my boyfriend quite well. Of course, since Alan was going, Sean came too. He didn't walk with us. He stayed about 10 meters behind us, which of course I felt was odd. But of course, I tried not to pay much attention to it. However, if you have anxiety, this is easier said than done. We made it to my house and Alan left as I was walking up my driveway. It was at this point that I realized Sean was not around. I didn't see him leave with Alan, nor did he walk me up my driveway. Again, I tried to not pay much attention to this observation, but of course it kept nagging at me, begging for me to give it my full attention. I fumbled with my keys and was about to put the key into the keyhole when Sean popped out of the bush next to my door. To say it startled me would be quite the understatement. I damn near crapped myself. Breathing heavily, he stared into my eyes and said, "Nice place. I'll see you later." And with that, he was gone. I hurried inside and locked the door quickly behind me. I went around to all the windows and doors, making sure they were all shut and locked. This is a part of my nightly routine, but I made sure to do it much slower tonight, double and then triple checking every entrance to the house. I went up to my room and my phone dinged as I received a notification from Facebook. It was a friend request from Sean. I ignored the request. Before I headed off to bed, my phone rang again. This time it was a message from a number I didn't recognize. I never answer calls from numbers I don't know, or texts, so I ignored it and went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I had 55 text messages from this unknown number. I had my suspicions that it was Sean, but now I could confirm it. I was going to school for nursing at the time, and some of his messages were about him calling me his naughty little nurse, and now he wanted me to stick him with needles and then do it to myself. He would describe my body in great detail. I didn't reply to him. I blocked the number, but it made no difference. He would message me on Facebook, so I reported and blocked him. However, he would make new profiles and message me from them. This went on for a couple of weeks before it started to get much worse. I was heading back to my room after having a shower, and I noticed that I had a message from Facebook. It read, "I love when your red hair is wet. It looks like blood." My stomach felt like it dropped down to my feet. There is a small window in my bathroom. I have never felt so violated in my life. I had enough at this point and decided to call the police. I showed them all the messages he had been sending me from different accounts and numbers. I also told them about his most recent message about the shower. They went outside to look around the area around my bathroom window. What they found still disgusts me to this day. They found sperm all over the bush under my window. The police told me they would go and speak with him and left. I was furious they didn't do more. I head back into my room to see I have another message on my screen. "No one can save you now," it said. I have never felt so helpless in my life. Perhaps if more were done, it wouldn't have gotten as bad as it did. I didn't tell anybody about what was happening, especially not my boyfriend, not my parents or my roommates or my closest friends. Things started to escalate even more. He started to follow me home when I got off work, so I always had a coworker walk home with me, since he lived in the same area. I always knew Sean was there. I could sense him following out of sight under cover of darkness, eyes burning into me as usual. About a month later, my coworker had to go home early. He wasn't feeling well, and so I had to walk myself home. It had been a few days since I felt him follow me home, so I tried to tell myself that he had probably given up. It was a peaceful night. Beautiful. I didn't get the usual feeling that Sean was following me, to which I felt very relieved. Maybe it was finally over. I thought to myself, but boy was I ever wrong. Another benefit to having an anxiety disorder, in my case at least, is you become very aware of your surroundings. I know everything about my house and where everything is supposed to be. My roommates all went to their families' homes for the weekend, so I knew I'd be coming home to a fully locked and secure house. Walking up to the front door, I got this feeling that something was wrong. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything in the front hallway was in order. I walked into the living room where we had a sliding glass door leading out to the patio. It was then that I stopped dead and I noticed it. The sliding door was not locked properly. The lock on it is kind of hard to push down for it to lock all the way. When I looked at it, it was only halfway down, as if somebody tried to lock it but didn't push it down the rest of the way when the lock started to resist. It was at this moment that I literally froze with fear. My roommates left before I left for work, so I locked up the house myself. Even if any of them came back while I was at work, they never used the patio door since they have keys. Plus, they all know about the fight you have to have with the door in order for it to lock completely. I ran into the basement and locked myself in the bathroom and called the police. It seemed like hours passed by before I heard a firm knock at the bathroom door and heard a male voice saying, "Police, open up." I didn't move at first, afraid that whoever broke in was just trying to get me out of the bathroom. But I heard a muffled, static voice from the policeman's radio. I opened the door to be greeted by 3 cops standing in front of me. "We found the man who broke into your house," said one of the officers. "He was hiding up in your bedroom." I didn't have to ask who the man was. Of course I knew who he was. I allowed myself to be led upstairs by the cops so I can identify the guy in the car as the guy who had been harassing me. When I looked into the car, Sean was staring back at me. He smiled maniacally up at me. "That's him," I said, softly to the cops. Before I turned to walk back into the house, I saw him mouth the words, "I'll see you later." I was told by police that when they found him in my room, he was hiding under my bed with a weapon. I didn't want to know the details about this weapon since I was already scared enough. There is no doubt in my mind that my life would have been ended had I not been as observant as I am. He was sent to jail and my life has changed forever. For somebody as independent as I am, changing into a person who is petrified to be by themselves concerned a lot of people around me. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone, not even my boyfriend. I never wanted to worry any of them, especially my family. I found out a few weeks ago that he was released from jail, and I received a notification on Facebook from him sending me a friend request. Not sure if this story belongs here, but I can still remember this day like it was yesterday. My mom's words clinging to my eardrums like plastic wrap on a leftover plate. "I need you and your friends to be extra careful. There have been reports of a white truck following little girls home. If you see your friends walking alone, don't let them. You can walk with them until they get there, and do not leave them until they reach their front door." To ease her worry, I began walking with everyone to school and back home. It took me longer to get home, but I had the safest location on my street. At that time, my house could see into all the surrounding parks and school playgrounds and sat on top of the hill. It was the next door to both the mayor of the housing authority and the SFC, Sergeant First Class of the military police. Edit, in my mom's defense, she was a single mom of 4 and was active duty. I didn't have the luxury of getting rides to school when typically she was out of the home at 5 a.m. and didn't return until 5 p.m. Even in the summer, school started at 8 a.m. and ended at 3 p.m. And you could only take a bus to school if you lived more than 3 miles from campus. In case you didn't know, the military is a full-time job, regardless of your home situation or your kids. When you get orders, you follow them or risk demotions or being dishonorably discharged. I did this same routine every day. Go across the street through the 2 houses, down to the sidewalk, go through an alleyway until I reach the Tank Destroyer Trail, walk half a mile to the concrete bridge that goes over the street, and finally down the other side to the school side doors. Reverse order. Repeat every year for 3 years. My mom was a drill sergeant, and until that morning, I had never really taken her word seriously. I remember telling her, "We live on a military base, Mom. There's no way I'll ever go missing, and besides, I can scream." It's summer in Central Texas. It's a blistering hot day, and summer school has been dismissed early. I and a few of my friends are walking home together, but today it's eerily quiet between us. My gut is buzzing like an angry hive the further away we get from the school. For whatever reason, I felt like I was being watched. I do a scan of the area and notice there are no other students around but myself, Aubrey, Ashley, and Amber. Nothing is being said as we get halfway across the bridge, so I break the silence and ask if they're okay. Ashley responds, "My mom and dad have been warning me about this truck that's following kids home." Aubrey chimes in, "Mine too. I think they're just trying to scare us." "But why?" I ask. "What purpose would that serve them to do that? Maybe to keep tabs on us?" Aubrey replied while looking at her phone. Aubrey's dad was a bit of a control freak, but I doubt that he would even done something that drastic to control her. If that were the case, then there would be no need for all of our parents to warn us. "Well, I'm going to go home this way today," Ashley says as she starts to take a different route home. "What about the truck?" Amber grabs Ashley's hand and grips it tightly. "You need to stay with us." I look over at Aubrey, who's walking a bit faster down the trail. I can hear the fear in her voice. I'm getting out of here before something bad happens. My hair practically jumps off my body hearing her say those words. All of the danger bells and whistles are going off so loudly that I can barely hear myself talk. "Ashley at least let us walk you there," I pled. She reluctantly agrees and comes back to the trail with us. Aubrey is a good length ahead of us, and so we yell for her to slow down. She turns around and I can see the whites of her eyes. I turn just slightly to my right from the corner of my eye. There's an all-white truck, no license plate, and a tinted front window so you couldn't see the driver. It was slowly driving by the curb on the main road, and it was definitely following us. There were no other cars around, and that made it all the more creepy. I stopped walking and looked straight at the truck. I tried to see if I could make out any distinctive marks. Maker model, but it didn't even have a brand on it. Ford, Chevy, Nissan. No grill emblem at all. Friends stopped, and then we all stared. Whoever was in the driver's seat was certainly looking back at us. All of us held our breaths and waited for it to leave. It didn't. My every sense was telling me to run. My gut was telling me to run. My fight or flight was the only flight at that point. I already knew what was going to come next. I placed my leg behind me, and as I took a step back, it's going to chase us. We need to run. Before the others could respond, the engine of the truck roared like a lion. The front tires jumped the curb, and the truck came barreling down the trail. That half a mile seemed to take forever to run down. We bolted down the trail as fast as we could. It definitely was gaining on us. We get to the end of the trail and stop at the sidewalk that's by my neighborhood street. It was still chasing us. We all shouted and screamed. Aubrey tried to grab her cell phone and dial 911, but dropped it as we were running. Where was everyone? How was no one hearing us cry out? Behind all these houses, whose backyards led to the walking trail? How is that even possible? Is no one seeing this? How can no one hear us? I tell them all to follow me to my house, and we finally get there. Our front door is locked, and I don't have my house key. We immediately go next door to the military police officer's house and begin hurling our fists at the door, screaming for help. The officer isn't home, but his wife is. She opens the door and we frantically get inside. We force her out of the way as we all run inside and slam the door shut. Miss Janet is asking us all kinds of questions, but we tell her to be quiet. We don't even make it to the couch. We all stand by the door and try to stay away from the windows. We hear the truck drive by and decide no one leaves until Miss Janet's husband comes home. Just thinking about it as I'm typing, this makes my stomach hurt 11 years later. Even now I find myself grasping for air. My mouth dries out, and my neck stings as if hot needles are being forced down my esophagus. When he came home, he made formal police reports, and he told our parents, teachers, and other students about the incident, but we never heard any other updates for the truck. From then on, teachers were on every post of the trail for kids walking home from the school. Military police officers were and still are posted on every corner within a 2-mile radius of the school.
I've been driving for Chow now for about 8 months now. It's not a career, just something I fell into after I got laid off from the warehouse. The pay's garbage, but it keeps my rent paid and my car running. It was a Friday night in late February. I remember because it was my brother's birthday weekend, and I'd been trying to hustle up enough cash for a decent gift. It had been pouring since 4, and the intersections were starting to flood so badly that my windshield wipers felt useless. I was about to pack it in for the night around 11:30 when this order popped up. It was a $72 Chinese food run from Golden Dragon, but the drop-off was way out on Hillcrest Road, even past where the streetlights reach. The GPS took me down roads I'd never been on. As the rain got heavier, my headlights barely cut through it. When I finally found the address, I had to double-check the numbers on the mailbox. It was an old 3-story Victorian-style mansion with a wraparound porch that was mostly rotted through. Half the shutters were hanging crooked. The lawn looked like it hadn't been mowed in years, but the lights were on inside. I could see them glowing through the front windows. I grabbed the food and ran up to the porch, trying to avoid the spots where the wood looked like it might give way. I knocked on the door, and it opened almost immediately. The guy who answered was maybe mid-40s, pale as hell, with long dark hair parted down the middle. He was wearing a full tuxedo with a bow tie, cummerbund, and shiny shoes. It looked like he was about to walk into a wedding. He thanked me, smiling ear to ear, for coming all the way out here. He said the food was for his anniversary dinner and that his wife was upstairs getting ready. I gave him the bag. He took it, then patted his pockets and frowned. He said his wallet was upstairs and asked if I could wait just a minute while he grabbed it. He even offered me $50 cash if I'd hang tight. I was tired and creeped out, but $50 would have covered my gas for the week, so I said sure and stepped inside. The entry hall was huge. It had hardwood floors, a giant staircase heading up to the second floor, and old paintings covering the walls. All the stuff looked expensive. but it was completely covered in dust, like nobody had bothered to clean in months. He led me toward the dining room and told me to make myself comfortable. The room was set up for a fancy dinner. The center table had a white tablecloth, china plates, and crystal wine glasses. There were candles everywhere, and I could even spot a bottle of expensive wine already open on the table. But I really felt queasy. The house was completely silent except for this loud ticking clock on the mantel. The guy stood there watching me for a second before he excused himself and said he'd be right back. I watched him head upstairs and waited around. I checked my phone, but there was zero service out here. All I could hear was that loud clock on the mantel. 5 minutes turned into 10. I was starting to get annoyed. $50 wasn't worth hanging out in some creepy house while this guy played dress up with his wife. I waited until about 15 minutes before I finally yelled out to see if everything was alright upstairs. He yelled back that his wife was almost ready. It'd take a couple more minutes at most. I waited a little longer, looking around the dining room again. Everything was too perfect. The wine glasses didn't have any smudges. The plates looked brand new, as if they'd never been used. Even the candles, which looked like they'd been lit forever, hadn't really dripped or melted much. 20 minutes in, I'd had enough. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and called up again. This guy poked his head over the railing and apologized. He said he couldn't find his wallet, that his wife must have moved it. He disappeared back into a room. I stood there debating whether to forget the tip and just leave. Suddenly I heard him talking. He was asking his wife where she'd put his wallet. There was definite frustration in his tone, and he was constantly blaming his wife for not taking good care of his things. What seemed like a normal married couple crisis struck me as odd, because all I could hear was the guy. There was no response from his wife. A tense feeling was spiraling in my stomach. I climbed the stairs slowly. The door was open about 6 inches. I got closer and heard him again. He was saying something about how beautiful she looked tonight, how he couldn't wait for dinner. His voice was tender. I reached the door and peeked through the gap. The guy was standing next to the bed with his back partially to me, and sitting on the bed, propped up against the headboard, was a skeleton bride, decked out in a full-on wedding dress. There was even a veil pinned to what was supposed to be its head. I could see a blonde wig sitting on top of the skull. He had actually gone and put makeup right on the bone where a face should have been. Its teeth were smeared with red lipstick, and there was a blush on the cheekbones. My heart started going a mile a minute. The guy was still going on and on about his wallet in the night, holding it in his hand. As silently as I could, I backed away from the door, almost tripped on the top step. I got down the stairs somehow and bolted to my car, without caring about the rain. I was halfway down Hillcrest Road before I pulled over and called the cops. The dispatcher stayed on the line while she sent a unit out there. 2 officers called me back about 40 minutes later. They'd gone to the house, talked to the guy, and asked to look around. He'd let them. They said the skeleton was plastic, something you'd buy at a Halloween store. The guy admitted he'd had it for years, and that he liked setting up dinners with it to cope with the loneliness. The officers ran his name. He had no criminal record in his name. Truly, he had never even been married to begin with. They asked if I wanted to press charges for anything. I didn't even know what I'd charge him with. Being weird? Wasting my time? I said no and hung up. I quit Chow Now the very next week. I told them it wasn't working out. My brother asked why, and I lied about the hours being too long. But really, I couldn't shake the image of that skeleton bride. I guess I should be glad it was just plastic. For a moment, I thought I'd stumbled across something much, much worse, but the whole thing still haunts me. Sometimes I wonder what that man does when he eats. Does he talk to her the whole time? Does he ever convince himself she talks back? I wonder if he's doing it tonight. I just moved to Manhattan and was hunting for work when a buddy suggested Grubhub. It was an easy gig with decent pay and a flexible schedule, so I figured why not. Most shifts were totally routine. I only had to grab food, drop it off, and pocket the tips. It was a Saturday night when that one order for apartment 12A popped up. The building was this crusty old complex. It looked exactly like something out of the Friends TV show. I had to drop off some Chinese takeout from a spot downtown. The customer requested a silent delivery. The instructions were super specific. Doors unlocked. Just leave the food on the table inside. Don't knock. It was definitely a bit weird, but honestly, not the craziest thing I'd seen. Some people just get really touchy about noise, especially late at night. I rolled up around 11:30. The front door was propped open with a brick. Half the lights in the hall were out, and the elevator was busted. I ended up hoofing it up the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled like mildew and rot, which made my throat tighten. I found 12A and checked the door. It was cracked open about 2 inches, exactly like the instructions said. I knocked lightly anyway, out of habit, but when I didn't get a response, I pushed the door open wider and called out that I had a delivery. The apartment was dark except for the flickering light from a television playing nothing but static. The smell was stronger inside, thick enough that I had to breathe through my mouth. I could see a small table just inside the door. I put the food down quickly, trying not to look too far into the apartment, but I couldn't help noticing the photographs on the wall. There were a dozen family pictures in cheap frames, and every single face had been scratched out. I backed toward the door, suddenly desperate to leave when a female voice whispered from deeper in the apartment. "Please don't go." It sounded weak in pain, as if she was hurt and needed help. I froze in the doorway, asked if someone was there, if they were okay, but they didn't answer. Each passing second made me uneasy. I felt eyes on me that made my skin crawl. Figuring I might have imagined it, I pulled the door closed behind me and walked quickly back to the stairs. All this time, my heart was pounding. Just as I reached the car, my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered. A guy started shouting at me, asking why I hadn't delivered his food. He said he'd been waiting for over 20 minutes. I told him I just left it inside his apartment like he requested. He said that was impossible. He'd been sitting right by the door the whole time. Nobody had knocked. I checked the app, confused. The delivery address showed apartment 16A, not 12A. My stomach dropped. I'd gone to the wrong apartment. The guy on the phone was still yelling. I told him I made a mistake, that I'd go back and get his food to the right place. But when I hung up, I just couldn't bring myself to turn around and go upstairs. There was something about that apartment that made me uneasy. Eventually, I marked the order as delivered and hauled it out of there. I knew my rating would take a hit, but I didn't care. The next morning, I was having breakfast when a news alert popped up on my phone. There was a huge police investigation going on in that same housing area where I went that night. A woman was found dead in 12A. My mouth dried up. I tapped the article, and my heart sank. It was an elderly lady who lived by herself. Apparently, a neighbor called it in because of the smell. The medical examiner figured she'd been gone for at least 10 days. My stomach flipped. I couldn't finish the article. How could anyone have been talking inside that apartment if the lady who lived there had been dead for a solid week? But I knew I had heard her. 2 days later, the investigation team rang me up. They'd found my name and number from the delivery app records, that I'd been one of the last people to enter the apartment before the body was discovered. I explained what happened, how I'd gone to the wrong apartment by mistake. He asked if I'd seen anything unusual. I told him about the scratched photographs and the voice I'd heard. There was a long pause. He called in a laptop and showed me security footage from the building's hallway camera. The timestamp showed 11:34 p.m. right when I made the delivery. The footage was pretty low res and dark, but I could definitely make out my own silhouette walking down the hallway. I saw myself stop at 12A and nudge the door open, getting in before I backed out and left. The detective let it play for another 30 seconds after I walked out of frame. What I saw next made my blood run cold. The door opened slowly, and this tall, skinny dude literally crawled out. He was moving on his hands and knees like an animal. I could tell he was wearing dark clothes and his back was to the camera. He stopped and turned his head towards the stairs. Maybe he was watching me leave or listening to my fading footsteps. And then he crawled back in, closing the door slowly. The detective stopped the video and asked if I'd seen anyone. I told him the place looked totally empty, except for that whisper I heard. He said the woman had been murdered for maybe 10 or 12 days before I showed up. The reports claimed her body had been repositioned multiple times over several days, like the killer had been living with the corpse. The detective figured it was a squatter who killed her and was using the apartment as a place to hide out. So when I walked in with the Chinese food, he was definitely there, hiding in the bedroom or maybe the bathroom. The investigation is underway, and the guy is at large. The camera footage is too blurry to get a face. I quit Grubhub the very next day. I couldn't handle it anymore. Every dark hall, weird instruction, and unlocked door makes me uneasy. The detective said I made a smart choice walking out, and that if I had gone looking for the person who spoke, I probably wouldn't have walked out of there alive. But honestly, I don't feel lucky or smart about any of it when I'm lying in bed every night. I keep running it over in my head, and I still can't figure out if it was the killer talking, or if it was the dead woman. It was past midnight by the time I finally dragged myself home that Wednesday. I was wiped out, soaked to the bone from the rain, and absolutely starving after pulling a double shift at the hospital. A month back, I'd probably just head up to the 3rd floor at Susan's and eat some of her fresh homemade. But Susan and most of the other tenants had bailed once the landlord stopped keeping up with the lift maintenance. Since I lived on the ground floor, I didn't really think the elevator situation was my problem. I ordered some basic pad thai and spring rolls from All Things Thai, which is only like 2 blocks away. The app assigned me a driver named Daniel. His profile pic was super blurry. It was just a dark blob that could have been literally anyone. I didn't sweat it though. People do that all the time. The app said it'd be about 20 minutes, so I figured I had enough time to get a quick shower. By the time I was done, it'd been almost half an hour and I still hadn't heard anything. I checked the tracker. Daniel's little dot just sitting there right across the street. I shot him a text asking if he was lost or if he needed the gate code to get in. He replied within seconds, saying he was just making sure it was me. My stomach tightened. What did that mean? I kept my eyes on the tracker as he started moving again. But instead of heading to my place, he started circling the block. I sent him another message asking what was up. He didn't reply. About 5 minutes later, I got the notification that my order had been delivered. But I hadn't heard a knock on my door or footsteps in the hall. I unlocked my door and looked out. A plastic bag was sitting on the floor right in front of my apartment, but the driver wasn't anywhere in sight. I snatched the bag, locked the door behind me, and took a look. The food was still hot. Everything seemed totally normal at first, until my eyes fell on the handwritten note taped to the bottom of the drink cup. I pulled out the piece of paper and read it. "Your curtains are open," it read. My heartbeat picked up. I dropped the cup and ran to my living room window. The curtains were open about 6 inches, enough for someone outside to see in. I yanked them closed and checked every other window in the apartment, pulling all the blinds and curtains shut. Right then, my phone buzzed. "Better," he texted. I hopped on the app and reported him right away. The auto reply said someone would look into it within 24 hours and take appropriate actions. That wasn't going to cut it, so I called support. I got stuck with the bot that kept trying to push me back to the app until I finally got a real person. They apologized and said they'd flag his account for an investigation. I hung up and did a lap around the place, checking all the locks. I made sure the chain was on and even wedged a chair under the doorknob for good measure. Slightly relaxed, I was about to dig into the dinner when the power suddenly cut out and the whole apartment went dark at once. I used my phone light to stumble my way to the kitchen and check the breaker box, but everything looked fine. None of the switches had flipped. I tried toggling them anyway, but nothing happened. Suddenly, I heard light footsteps right outside my door, followed by 3 quick knocks. I checked the peephole. The hall was totally dark, and I couldn't make anyone out. My phone buzzed with another text from Daniel. Wrong door. As I turned, the knocking came again. Terrified, I ran to my bathroom and locked myself inside, dialing 911 with my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the right numbers. The dispatcher picked up, and I tried to explain what was happening. She told me the cops were on their way and to just stay on the phone with her. The police showed up about 8 minutes later. I heard them in the hall, knocking and shouting that it was the cops. I finally came out of the bathroom and let them in. 2 officers came in and searched the whole place. One of them asked to see the driver's profile, so I opened up the app, but my order history was completely blank. There was no record of any delivery tonight, or a charge in my bank statement. I scrolled back through weeks of stuff I'd ordered before, but there was absolutely zero proof I'd ordered anything tonight. The officer asked me if I was sure I'd even ordered food. He said being exhausted after a double shift can make your mind play tricks on you. I pointed to the bag sitting on my kitchen counter. The food was right there along with the note and receipt. He picked it up to get a better look, and I watched the color drain from his face. He asked me how long I'd been living there. I told him it had been about 6 months. He held up the receipt so I could see it. The timestamp said the food was delivered 6 years ago, November 14, 2019, at 11:47 p.m. I told him that was impossible. The food was literally still warm. I just picked it up 20 minutes ago. The other officer asked for my landlord's name and how long they'd been running the place. I gave him the info. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through something before he showed his screen to his partner. They both gave me this look like they felt sorry for me, but also like they were creeped out. The first guy asked if I knew anything about the person who lived here before me. I told him no. The landlord never said a word about it. He said a woman lived in this unit 6 years back. That November, she called the cops a bunch of times because someone kept knocking on her door in the middle of the night. She even filed a report about a delivery driver named Daniel who was harassing her. 2 days after she made that last report, she vanished without any signs of a break-in. They tried searching a lot but couldn't find her. My blood went cold. The officer stayed while I threw some stuff in a bag, and one of them even walked me down to my car. Before I left, I asked if they ever found out who the driver was. Apparently they never did. The delivery company denied ever having a driver named Daniel working for them. I stayed at my sister's for 3 days. When I finally went back, I hired movers and got out of my lease immediately. I've moved 4 times since then. I always live on the 2nd floor or higher. I have cameras everywhere, and my curtains always stay shut, because I'm still terrified of getting a last text sighting. Wrong door. I've been watching kids for extra money since I was about 16. So by the time I was in my early 20s, I thought I'd seen everything. Tantrums, allergies, one kid who used to eat paper. Nothing really caught me off guard anymore. But there was one family I sat for when I was 22 that I still think about more than I probably should. The mom's name was Diane. She found me through a mutual friend and reached out, asking if I'd be available on weekends. She had a son named Callum, 8 years old, and she was a single parent who worked occasional evening shifts at a hospital. She seemed completely normal, warm even. The kind of person who over-explains things because she genuinely wants you to be comfortable. I liked her right away. The first time I showed up, Callum was sitting at the kitchen table doing a puzzle. He looked up at me, said hi, and went straight back to it. Quiet kid, polite. He didn't talk much that night, which didn't bother me. Some kids just take time to warm up. The only thing that stuck with me was that at one point I caught him staring at me from across the room. Not in a curious way, more like he was studying me. When I smiled at him, he didn't smile back. He just looked away. I told myself he was probably just shy. That was the first time. I didn't think much of it. The second weekend I came back, things were mostly the same. We watched a movie. I made him a grilled cheese, and he went to bed without any fuss. Normal enough. But right before I tucked him in, he said something I brushed off in the moment but came back to me later. He asked me very casually whether I slept with the door open or closed. I told him I slept with it closed and asked him why. He just shrugged and said he was asking for a friend. I laughed it off. He was 8. Kids say weird things. It wasn't until my third visit that something shifted. I was sitting on the couch around 9 o'clock, phone in hand, when I heard Callum moving around upstairs. I figured he'd gotten up for water, but the footsteps weren't heading toward the bathroom. They were slow and deliberate, moving from one side of the hallway to the other, back and forth. I went to the bottom of the stairs and called up to him. He answered immediately, sounded completely fine, said he was going back to bed. The footsteps stopped. I stood there for a second listening, and then went back to the couch, but I kept the TV on mute for the rest of the night, and I'm not sure I could tell you exactly why. When Diane came home, I almost said something. Almost. I didn't want to make her feel like something was wrong with her kid over what was probably nothing, so I just told her the night went fine, took my money, and left. The fourth visit was the one that made me seriously consider not going back. It was late in the evening, maybe 9:30, and Callum had been in bed for over an hour. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I heard him talking in his room. I assumed he was on a tablet or something, but Diane had told me screens went off at 8. I stood in the hallway outside his door and listened for a minute. He wasn't watching anything. He was talking, steadily, quietly, like he was in the middle of a conversation. I knocked and pushed the door open. He was sitting upright in bed in the dark, and he stopped the second the door opened. He looked at me completely normally and said he was just thinking out loud. I asked him who he was talking to, and he said very plainly that he was practicing. I asked him what he meant by that. He said, just as plainly, what to say when you're asleep. I didn't know how to respond to that. I told him to get some sleep and close the door. I sat in the kitchen for the rest of the night with every light on. The last time I was in that house was a few weeks later. I remember convincing myself I'd overreacted, that he was just a kid with a strange sense of humor and imagination. Diane had been nothing but kind and reliable. I felt guilty for even considering quitting. That night was quiet for the most of it, normal. Callum went to bed around 8:30 without any trouble. I was on the couch when I heard something just after 11. It was faint, coming from the hallway upstairs. I turned the TV off and listened. It sounded like whispering, but slow, almost rhythmic, like something being recited. I went upstairs. Callum's door was slightly open. I pushed it open the rest of the way. He was standing at the foot of his own bed, back to me, facing the wall. He was whispering something I couldn't make out, and his arms were at his sides, completely still. He wasn't moving at all, just standing there, whispering at the wall. I said his name. He stopped. And then, after a long pause, he turned around. His face was completely blank. Not scared, not startled, He looked at me like he'd been expecting me to come in, looked me up and down once, and then got back into bed and pulled the covers up without a single word. I texted Diane that same night and told her I couldn't come back. I said I had scheduling conflicts. She replied saying she understood and she hoped everything was okay. And that was the last I ever heard from her. I've thought about it a lot since then, what he was whispering, what he meant about practicing what to say while I was sleeping, whether that was the first time he'd done that or just the first time I'd seen it. I don't have any answers to any of it. I'm not sure I want them. My grandmother never slept in the back bedroom. That was just a fact of the house, like how the third step creaked or how the kitchen window never fully closed. Nobody talked about it. It was just understood. I moved in with her the summer I turned 17, after things at home got complicated. She had a 2-story house in rural Georgia, the kind of town where nothing happens and everyone knows it. My grandmother was sharp, practical, a little cold. She'd raised 4 kids mostly alone and had no patience for what she called dramatics. I respected that about her. I still do. The back bedroom sat at the end of the upstairs hallway. Bed, dresser, a window facing the tree line. She told me on the first day I was welcome to use it for storage. She said it casually, almost too casually, then changed the subject before I could respond. I noticed later that the dresser drawers were completely empty. Empty in a way like someone had decided nothing would ever go in them again. I didn't think much of it at the time. My grandmother didn't believe in air conditioning. My bedroom caught the afternoon sun, and by 9 at night, sat at maybe 90 degrees. I'd lie on top of the sheets soaked through, staring at the ceiling. 3 weeks in, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my pillow and walked down the hall. The back bedroom was at least 15 degrees cooler. A cross breeze moving through from the tree line. I lay down and was asleep within minutes. I woke once in the night for no clear reason, lying there half awake. I noticed the breathing in the room didn't quite match my own. A rhythm underneath mine, slightly slower, slightly off. I told myself it was an echo off the walls. I went back to sleep. In the morning, there was an indentation on the mattress beside me. Just a slight depression, like weight had rested there. I stared at it, then straightened the sheets and went downstairs. She was already in the kitchen. She watched me pour water, then asked quiet where I'd slept. I told her, said it was cooler, that I hadn't been sleeping well. She turned back to the stove. Her grip on the dish towel tightened slightly, just for a second. "Don't sleep in there again," she said. No explanation, no reason given. Something in her tone stopped me from pushing back. Not anger, something quieter. A few nights later, I caved. Middle of July, genuinely miserable. I waited until I heard her bedroom door click shut, then went back down the hall. I slept fine for a few hours. Then, something woke me. Not a sound, more like a change in the air. I opened my eyes, and she was standing at the foot of the bed. Just standing, hands at her sides, staring at me. The hallway light behind her made it hard to see her face, but I could tell she'd been there a while already, settled into it. I said her name. She didn't answer. I said it again. She turned slowly and walked out. No words, just gone, like she'd finished whatever she'd come to do. I lay back down. The window across the room was open about 3 inches. I was certain I checked it before lying down. I hadn't wanted it to bang in the night. There was no wind. The curtain hung completely still. I watched the ceiling until it got light, then went down and acted like nothing had happened. She was cheerful over breakfast, asked if I'd slept well. I said fine. I left 2 days later, packed my bag, hugged her, drove the 40 minutes home without the radio. I kept replaying her standing there, still, silent, at the foot of the bed. Wrong in a way I didn't have language for yet. This is the part I still don't know how to talk about. 4 nights later, I woke up around 3 to a low, rhythmic murmuring. My brain tried to place it, a TV, a phone, my parents down the hall, but the house was empty except for me. They were away for the week. As I came fully awake, I realized it was in the room. She was standing at the foot of my bed. She'd driven 40 minutes in the middle of the night. I hadn't heard her come in. Same nightgown, eyes open but not quite looking at me, looking through me, focused on something just past my face. I forced myself to listen. Lord, cover this child. Something has followed him, Lord. Something got hold of him in that room, and I felt it leave with him, Father. And he don't even know. She broke into something that wasn't quite English, then back. Demon, you release him. He don't belong to you. He went in that room and you latched on. And I'm telling you now, you have to go. Her eyes shifted, just slightly, to the left of my head. Her whole body still. She was watching something with a focus so total I turned to look, certain I'd see it too. But nothing, just the wall. The dark corner where the ceiling met. When I looked back, her eyes had moved, tracking something crossing the room. Her chin dropped, like whatever it was had come closer. Then, clear and direct, looking straight at me. Repent, she said. Suddenly clear and direct, looking straight at me. Boy, you need to repent. You opened a door and you need to close it. You hear me? You need to close it now. I turned on the lamp. She blinked. Something shifted in her face, like a curtain being pulled back. She looked around the room slowly, confused. The way someone looks when they've woken up somewhere unfamiliar. She looked at me, then down at herself, then back at me. She didn't say anything else. She walked out without a word. I heard her settle onto the living room couch. I still don't know how she got in. I'm almost sure the doors were locked. In the morning, she was gone before I woke up. She'd folded the blanket she used and left it on the armrest. She never brought it up, not once, not ever, in the years I had left with her. I've thought about that night more times than I can count. The rational part of me says she was sleepwalking or confused. Or maybe her mind was starting to go in ways none of us had noticed yet. That's probably what it was. It has to be, but I've never been able to fully shake what she said. Something got hold of him in that room. She said it like she knew. And the thing is, she told me not to go in there. She told me on the very first day. My twins stopped sleeping in their rooms when they were 6. Not in a dramatic way. They didn't come running into our bed screaming about monsters. It was Maya who started first, quietly showing up in the hallway outside her door most mornings, curled up on the floor with her blanket like she dragged herself there in the night. I'd find her before sunrise and carry her back to bed, and she'd wake up a few hours later perfectly fine. No memory of it. I didn't think much of it at the time. After the 3rd or 4th morning, my husband suggested we just let her sleep with us for a while. Maya climbed into our bed that first night like she'd been waiting for permission. Her brother Eli thought the whole thing was unnecessary. He was never the anxious one. Where Maya was quiet and careful, Eli was the kind of kid who'd walk into a dark basement without a second thought just to prove he could. He told us at breakfast that Maya was being a baby. She didn't argue, just looked at her cereal. The first time I noticed something off was maybe 2 weeks in. I woke up around 3 a.m. and found Maya sitting upright beside me, eyes open, completely still. She was looking toward the open bedroom door, out into the hallway, her gaze fixed upward at a slight angle, toward the corner where the hallway wall meets the ceiling. I called her name softly and she didn't react. I told myself she was just half awake. But there was something about how still she was. Not restless like a drowsy child. That made me watch her until her eyes closed again. It took a while. It kept happening. Every few nights, same posture, same angle, same corner. There's an old water stain up there from a leak we never properly fixed. Just a faint brown ring on the plaster. And her gaze landed on it each time with a precision that started to unsettle me more than I wanted to admit. I mentioned it to my husband and he said she was probably just waking up disoriented. I agreed, but I started sleeping lighter after that. About a week later, Eli started having trouble. He didn't make a big thing of it. That wasn't his way. He came to breakfast one morning looking tired and said he kept waking up for no reason. I assumed disrupted sleep, the change in routine. He slept fine the next 2 nights and I forgot about it. Then on the 3rd night, I heard his door open around 2 a.m. I got up quietly. When I stepped into the hallway, Eli was standing a few feet from his door, arms loose at his sides, head tilted back at the same sharp angle I'd seen on Maya's face. He was staring at the ceiling corner, at the stain. His eyes were wide open and I genuinely couldn't tell if he was awake. I called his name. Nothing. I called it again, louder, and he turned slowly, blinking, and said in a completely normal voice, "I was just getting water." Then he went back to his room and closed the door. He didn't remember it in the morning. That was the part that stayed with me. Not that it happened, but that it happened to both of them. Maya I could half explain away, but Eli wasn't built for nervousness. Eli didn't spook. And yet there he was, standing in the same spot, staring at the same fixed point his sister had been staring at for weeks. They hadn't discussed it. I know because I asked, carefully. Neither of them knew the other had been doing it. Then Maya started drawing it. I only put it together later. She'd been leaving the same picture everywhere for weeks. On the kitchen table, in her backpack, folded in her jeans pocket when I did laundry. Always the same image, a hallway, a small figure on the floor. And in the upper corner, something dark. Not a person, not a recognizable shape, just something dark rendered in overlapping circles. The way kids draw when they're pressing too hard with the crayon. I asked her once what it was. She looked at the drawing for a moment and said, completely matter-of-factly, "That's the thing that watches." Then she went back to her cereal. When I showed Eli one of the drawings a few days later without telling him his sister had made it, he studied it quietly. Then he pointed to the dark shape and said, "That's not right. It's bigger than that." He handed it back and walked outside to ride his bike, and I stood in the kitchen not knowing what to do with what he just told me. We sold the house 8 months ago. New city, new school, fresh start. Both kids have slept normally since the move. Their own rooms, full nights, no incidents. They're fine. By every measure I have, they're completely fine. But last week, I got a message from the woman who bought the house. She was friendly about it, almost apologetic. She said they'd had a contractor in to fix the old water damage in the upstairs hallway, and when he opened up the ceiling to check the rot, he found something inside the wall cavity. A small pile of objects, a button, 2 coins, a child's shoe, and a piece of paper, folded many times over, with something drawn on it in faded pencil. She sent me a photo. I haven't been able to look at it for more than a few seconds. I can't fully make out everything in it, except that in the upper corner of the drawing, there's something dark. And below it on the floor are 2 small figures. I don't know what my kids were looking at all those nights. I don't know what they knew that I didn't, or how they both knew it independently without a word passing between them. I don't know if any of it truly connects, or if I'm just a parent who needed things to connect. What I do know is that neither of them has asked about the old house since we left. 2 kids who spent 6 years there. And between them, not a single word about it. I think about that more than I probably should.
So this happened in 2011, so the exact dialogue may have escaped my memory a bit, but the situation is something I'll never forget. Also, AIM was still pretty active during this time, and so was video chatting. Think tiny chat. This is important for later. I was on an online dating site. I won't say which one because I'll be dragged mercilessly in the comments, and was talking to this guy. I was 31 at the time and he was 28. We talked about 6 weeks before I gave him my phone number, and we took it offline to calling and texting for another couple weeks. 2 months after our initial chat, we were texting and he told me that he was out having a few beers at a bar near my house. He asked what I was doing and asked if I wanted to come out, but I had a very long day at work and didn't feel like going to a bar. I'm also not a big drinker. I invited him over to my place. After he finished at the bar and he accepted, I figured I would be okay since I do keep firearms for protection and know how to defend myself if needed. I also had a webcam. I took a shower so I wouldn't smell like a water buffalo on a hot day. The air went out at work, put on some makeup and got dressed to wait. He then called and said he was outside my house. I clicked record on my computer's webcam program and turned off my monitor and went to let him in. It was around 10 p.m. and when he comes in, we go back to my bedroom because my living room was being remodeled. We're sitting on the bed chatting for about an hour, talking about everything under the sun. The conversation flowed. He was very handsome and so easy to be comfortable with. We got on the subject of firearms and I showed him mine. About 15 minutes later, he asked for some water, so I go to the kitchen to get him a bottle. When I came back, he said he got a phone call and had to leave. After he left, I looked on my nightstand where I put the firearm down after showing him and noticed that it was gone. I looked everywhere for it, thinking I'd put it down somewhere else. Nope, not there. I then played back the recording from my webcam program and sure enough, shows him grabbing it and putting it in his hoodie. I was terrified at that point. He knew where I lived, had my firearm, and he left his phone on my bed. Right then his phone rings and I answer it. Come to find out, he's married. His wife was calling him wondering where he was. I told her everything, including the fact that he stole my firearm and I had video evidence and was calling the police on him. Next thing I know, he's banging on my door, my firearm in his hand, asking me for his phone. The conversation went like this. I need my phone. Give it to me. Me. Not opening the door but yelling through the window. Take the clip out of my firearm, empty the chamber, throw the clip into the bushes and the one in the chamber across the road and put it on the ground. No. Give me my phone. I'm on the phone with your wife at the moment and I have you on video stealing it from me. I put his wife on speaker. A whole bunch of expletives. Him being shocked, runs and gets in his car then comes back. I threw your gun in the ditch, he said. At this point I make him empty his pockets, take his pants off, take his hoodie off, and show me that he doesn't have my firearm on him. All the while his wife is on the phone. I go outside and get in his car, in the driver's seat, and tell him to take me where he threw my firearm. He proceeds to tell me that I don't know how hard it is for him, being a felon, not being allowed to own a gun ever because of a mistake he made. The mistake? Domestic violence involving a gun. We get up the road and he tells me it's there in the ditch. Then I realize the situation I'm in. I can get out of the car and go get it, leaving him to do whatever to me if he chooses. He was 6'4" and 225 pounds. I was 5'3" and 135 pounds at the time. Or I could make him go get it, taking a chance of him seriously hurting me. I took that chance since I was on the phone with his wife and my phone with 911. He retrieves my stuff, brings it to the car, and I drive back to my house and wait on the police. I get out of the car and he gets in the driver's seat. I'm still on the phone with the police. I walk around the back of his car to get his license plate number, and he just puts his car in reverse, hits me, and takes off. I found him later that evening. He still had the clip and one in the chamber in his pocket, so now he's enjoying time in prison. Okay, so I've been trying to figure out how to write this for like 2 weeks now because every time I start, I either freak myself out all over again or it just doesn't come out right. But people keep asking me why I quit the Speedway job so suddenly, and I'm tired of just saying it wasn't for me because that's not really true. And honestly, what happened deserves to be written down somewhere, so here it is. For context, I was working the closing shift at a Speedway like 3 nights a week. I'd been there since June, so about 4 months when this happened. It was me and this girl Ashley, whom I actually really liked, and we'd usually close together, which made it fine. Like, we'd talk and mess around at the time went fast. But Ashley had switched her availability for school, and for about 3 weeks before this happened, I'd been closing alone. I want to say I was never like scared to be there alone because it was a gas station on a main road and there were always at least a few people coming in and out even late at night. It felt safe enough. I had my phone and I knew where the panic button was behind the counter, and I'd been trained on all of it. I genuinely was not a person who got freaked out easily. Just need you to know that before I get into it. It was a Thursday, October, so it was already dark by like 6. Ashley had left at 9, and it was just me until 11 when we fully closed. I had the radio going behind the counter, and I was doing the cooler inventory on my little clipboard, which is genuinely the most boring task in human history, and I was mostly just thinking about what I was going to eat when I got home. The store phone rang at like 10 past 8. We got calls sometimes, people asking if we had certain stuff in stock or whatever, so I picked it up and said, "Thank you for calling Speedway. This is Brianna. How can I help you?" And just nothing. Complete silence on the other end. I said hello a couple of times and then figured it was a bad connection or a misdial and hung up. Went back to my clipboard. At 8:25, the phone rings again. I picked it up and said the same thing, but the same silence. Held it for a few seconds and hung up. At this point, I was mostly just annoyed because the phone was behind the counter and every time it rang, I had to stop what I was doing and walk back over there. I genuinely thought it was some kid prank calling. Like that still happens apparently, and I was more irritated than anything. Around 8:40 it rings again. 9 o'clock again. By this point, the every 15 minutes thing it starts to register, and that was when I stopped being annoyed, and it started feeling like something else completely. Like there was something about how consistent it was that felt intentional, in a way that random prank calls usually aren't. I picked up the 9 o'clock one and didn't say anything. Just listened. And that's when I heard it. Breathing. Not heavy or dramatic, just quiet and steady and completely deliberate. Like somebody holding the phone and just breathing into it, waiting. I hung up and stood behind the counter for a second and realized my heart was going. And I felt stupid about it because it was probably still just some idiot kid, but I couldn't quite get back to normal after that one. I texted my friend Maya something like, "Some creepy person keeps calling the store, LOL." And she sent back a bunch of skull emojis, and I laughed and felt better and refilled the hot dog roller thing and tried to move on. The call stopped after 9. And I know this sounds weird, but the silence after was almost worse. Like my body had gotten used to waiting for the phone to ring every 15 minutes. And when it stopped, I didn't feel relieved. I just felt like something had shifted. Can't explain it better than that. Just felt like whatever was on the other end of those calls had stopped calling because it was done with that part. I was straightening the chipwreck by the front windows around 9 when one of the front door handles moved. Not open, moved. Like somebody had grabbed it from the outside and pulled once, testing it and let go. I looked up immediately and there was nobody visible through the glass. Just the parking lot and the pumps and my car sitting under the light. I stared at the door for a long moment and told myself it was the wind, even though I knew it wasn't because it was a handle, not a push door, and wind doesn't grab handles. I went back to the chipwreck. A little after 9, the side door rattled. The side door is by the coolers on the east wall. It's like a secondary entrance that most regular customers don't really use, more of a local thing. I heard it from across the store, that same single testing rattle and then nothing. I walked to where I could see it from, and the little window on it showed me nothing but the side lot and a dumpster in darkness. I went behind the counter and just stood there. Then the back door. The back door is in the stock room. It's not visible from the sales floor. It's not visible from the street. It leads to a narrow service alley behind the building, and this is the thing that got me. The thing that made my stomach just drop completely, because that door is not something that a random person wandering around would just find and try. You'd have to know the building and you'd have to know it was there. It didn't just rattled. It rattled and then the handle went down slowly all the way, like somebody pushing it as far as it could go before the lock caught it. Then it was held there for a second before releasing. Like whoever's on the other side just wanted me to know they tried it. I turned the lights off in the back half of the store and went into the stock room and got behind a shelf unit in the corner. Called 911. I was whispering and the dispatcher was calm and good and told me to stay on the line, that somebody was on the way. I had my knees pulled up to my chest behind the shelf of motor oil, and I was staring at the back door trying to not make a sound. It was quiet for a few minutes and I started to think maybe they were gone. Maybe the police would get here and find nothing and I'd feel stupid and go home. Then the back door handle went down again. Slower this time. All the way down and held there, and I was watching the door flex slightly in the frame from the presence of someone leaning on it from the other side, and I put my hand over my mouth and didn't breathe. It was released. Then I heard something at the bottom of the door. Soft sound, paper on concrete, and a folded piece of paper slid through the gap underneath the door and sat on the stockroom floor. I did not touch it. I told the dispatcher and she told me not to touch it, and I just sat there staring at it on the floor until I heard the front door and the officer's voice calling out, announcing himself. They found nobody. Checked the whole building. Checked the alley. Checked the street. Whoever it was gone. They unfolded the paper with gloves and showed it to me, and I wish they had it. It was a drawing of the inside of the store, hand-drawn and accurate. The counter and the coolers and the chip racks and the stock room all laid out correctly. My name was written in the middle of the sales floor. On the back was a sketch of the parking lot with my car drawn in and circled, my actual car. The dented white Civic I'd been driving since I was 16, and at the bottom was my closing schedule for the next 2 weeks, correct down to the exact days and hours. The phone calls came back to a payphone 4 blocks away. The detective showed me a still from the security camera on the payphone. A figure in a dark hoodie making call after call, never once turning toward the camera. Definitely not by accident. Purposely keeping their face away from it across every single call for over an hour. Quit the next morning. I didn't even go back in to get my stuff. I just called and quit over the phone, and my manager didn't really argue about it, which tells me she probably understood why. 2 weeks later, I got a text from a girl named Courtney who had worked that same closing shift at the same location and quit suddenly about 8 months before I started. She'd seen something on my Instagram about it. She told me the same thing had happened to her. The calls and the doors and the note slid under the back. I asked her what her note said. She said it was a drawing of the store with her name written in the middle of it. Different name, same handwriting. I haven't worked a closing shift anywhere since, and I genuinely don't think I ever will again. I still don't know who it was, and as far as I know, nobody does. The case is open, I think, but I haven't heard anything in a while, and I've kind of stopped expecting to. I just needed this written down somewhere. I needed it to be real outside of my own head. So I began college really young. I was barely 17, going to university for my 3rd year in dancing ballet. My grandma and I had left California so I could pursue dance and various other interests, and she could see her friends and do what she pleased. This was supposed to be a constant summer for us. I wouldn't consider myself to do anything to attract unwanted attention. I'm pretty tall and willowy, Middle Eastern, and I go out of my way to be put together. I'm exotic, but it was one of those hot summers, and we were visiting San Francisco for a few months before heading back to Seattle and resuming our schedule and travel and dance. We landed in San Francisco and met my grandma's friend Sophie, and we were taken to her house. We entered the house, and that's when I met Anton. Anton wasn't American, so he had that going for him. He was European, rail thin, taller than a skyscraper, and quite attractive. He also happened to have these dark Ted Bundy eyes. He fixed me with an intense stare and opened his mouth and said, "Wow, if I'd known you'd been flying in, I would have come to pick you up." He left the room, and Grandma's friend, Anne, Sophie's sister, told us that Anton was her grandson and staying with her for the summer, and that he liked the house spotless. We'd been flying all day, and so I decided to unpack and shower. I have OCD, and so I like to have my things perfectly organized. Calfskin, satin, and canvas ballet shoes all had their own place in the drawers. My point shoes had a very different place. My leotards and dance skirts had a place. Every single one of my scrunches had one. Panties were arranged by the color of lace and satin, and tights and leg warmers were together. My point is that everything went away properly, in a way that couldn't be disturbed without me absolutely knowing. I'd leave for ballet every morning at 6 a.m. and arrive back at 3 p.m. like clockwork. At first, I noticed small things, but I was truly happy, and I'd started this natural medicine routine for my OCD that damn near eliminated it. The first thing I noticed was that my panties were not in order, then my tights, and then my scrunchie. But me being not me, I brushed it off. Change is normal, and I desperately wanted to be normal, and so I chalked it up to clumsiness on my part and let it slide. The second thing I noticed was that he'd get jealous and was prone to rages. I would go on outings with a man, Francis, who was 46 at the time and also European. He and I would go to Golden Gate Park, and he would take me to UC Berkeley and art museums. He and I did things together and had an amazing time because I felt alive. Slowly, Anton began to insert himself into our outings by throwing screaming fits and smashing glasses, hurling books at me, hurting the cat, and terrorizing us until Anne decided to placate him by allowing him to come with Francis and me wherever we went. The moment I realized something was off was when I arrived back pretty early in the morning, around 3 a.m. to be exact. I walked into my room and it had been tossed. My panty drawer was open and nothing had been left untouched. My bed had been slept in or been in. The pillows and blankets had been obviously rustled and disturbed. The stench of my perfume was heavy in the air. My trash was various sanitary items had been picked through, and my diary was gone. Needless to say, I freaked. The house was silent though, and I didn't want to disturb the peace, and so I let the rest of my night be spent cleaning and reorganizing to the best of my abilities. Morning came, the turning point. I didn't know San Fran perfectly because I'd only been there for about 3.5 weeks at this point, and I still had a few months left. I had a free day, and so I decided to go down to the beach and have lunch by myself. I told Grandma and her friends that I'd be gone for the day, and I set off by myself. I made a few detours and stopped to look at things and buy things. I made so many stops that there's no way Anton could have followed me without me knowing, but when I arrived to walk the beach, he was there. I remember this so clearly. He was hunched over and facing away from me, and he had one of his notebooks, and he was speaking into the air in Polish as he wrote. The beach was basically empty, and it was obviously going to rain. The sky was pretty damn black. Since he was looking down and focused on his writing, and I was wearing a cargo skirt with lots of pockets, I thought that if I could silently put the small things in my hands into my pockets, I could pull a runner. I had to get out of there. Either I'd go to the beach where I'd find someone and get help, or hit the rough water and pray he didn't follow me, or I'd run into a store and hope that they'd help me. I managed to maneuver everything in my pockets and turned to head off. He almost seemed to know that I was trying to go. As soon as I turned, he turned and said, "Hi, Elita." I think he was moving slowly to scare me, but I was frozen in place as he put his little moleskine in his pocket and started towards me. Then the world started moving normally again, and as he started towards me, I ran towards the beach. I think he was as shocked as I was because I had a head start and I had gone past him, but I was running on sand and it wasn't working out for me. While he ran towards me, he was alternating between screaming in Polish and screaming in English that he'd cut my eyes out and carve me up like how they did during the war, and that he'd mess me up so badly that I'd never dance again. And he'd carve my face up so badly that he'd be the only guy that would ever want me. And that would be okay since he truly loved me. I turned and he literally had a switchblade and was coming for me. And it was like my fight or flight snapped into place because I somehow knew that I had been set up. And I was mad because I wasn't destined to die on the beach by his hand. I somehow made it to the beach barely able to breathe and hit the hard parking lot breathing and running hard. Then he was right behind me, fire in his eyes, and he pushed me so hard that I flew, skidding across the pavement, ripping my arm and legs up. My head slammed into the ground so hard that I thought my neck had cracked. He got on top of me while I was dazed and waved his blade right above my face and said, "I will carve out your Achilles heels and carve hunks of your muscle out of your legs. I'll carve your face. You belong to me and we belong together. My summer was in my control and peaceful until you ruined it." He said this in a perfectly calm voice. It slowly occurred to me that I was probably going to die, and there was something in my brain that told me to just accept it. I could feel myself bleeding, and I was somehow calm and collected while he was crying and screaming at me, and his spit was flying into my face. Then it happened. I somehow managed to get a handful of sand and gravel into my hand and throw it in his eyes and mouth. He faltered for a split second, and I somehow managed to scamper to my feet and stumble into a run with the last strength I had. I made it into a little souvenir store, and this horrified woman called the police and sat with me and pressed a tie-dye t-shirt against my scrapes until the authorities arrived. I didn't need stitches or anything, just a lot of bandaging and ice packs. As I had suspected, Anne had told Anne where I was going because he had said that he wanted to spend the afternoon with me. I do blame her because it had been obvious what he was going to do. It came out later that she had known that he had been using my things to masturbate in the bed that I'd been sleeping in. He had written me 30-plus long-page letters that she had removed from my room. He talked to me about her endlessly, and she allowed him to lapse into delusions about me. The worst thing that she did was immediately getting him back to his family in Poland the second it seemed like he may have been arrested. I have blame as well. I had known to stay clear of him, and yet I ventured off alone. I never mentioned my fears to anyone, and I didn't bring anything to protect myself. I still dance, more than I did before. I think I'm even better now. The scars faded. I call Sophie now and then, and I stay far from Warsaw. Sophie called me the other day to warn me that Anne would be coming to America to do his last 2 years of university here. She offered to give me the necessary documents to report him to his university. And so, Anne, if you're listening to this, stay the heck out of my city.
Most people in my neighborhood live for Halloween. The decorations, the parties, the thrill of being scared. But last October changed all of that for me. Now when the leaves start to fall and the evenings grow colder, I can't help but remember the night I stopped feeling safe in my own home. It was a Friday night. My husband Derek was out of town for a work conference in Seattle. I was alone in our house while a huge storm rolled through the neighborhood. I was curled up on the couch in sweatpants with a bowl of popcorn, halfway through a horror movie marathon, when the landline rang around 11:30. Nobody ever used the landline. At first, I almost ignored it, but Derek sometimes called from hotel phones when his battery died, so I grabbed the receiver and said hello. There was static for a second. Then a man's voice asked me in a creepy voice, "What's your favorite scary movie?" I actually laughed a little because it sounded so ridiculous. I told him to bore someone else before Halloween. He laughed in a weirdly calm yet playful voice like he was enjoying a private joke. I told him it's a wrong number, but he called me by name. That's when I jumped on the couch. I yelled, "Who is this?" Instead of answering, he said I looked comfortable tonight. My stomach dropped. I looked down at myself automatically. I'm indeed in my sleeping clothes. But how did he know that? Then he said something that hit me like a brick to the face. He said he liked my ponytail. The only way he could have known that was if he could see me. I rushed to the front window and pulled the curtain aside. Across the street, standing directly underneath the flickering streetlight, was a tall figure wearing the black robe and a white ghost face mask from Scream. He was completely still, just staring at my house, at me. Then he slowly lifted one hand and waved. I stumbled backwards so fast I almost tripped over the coffee table. "What the hell do you want?" I shouted into the phone. The voice chuckled softly. "To see what your insides look like." Then the line went dead. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the phone onto the couch. I immediately locked the front door, even though it was already locked. Then I checked every window and every other door in the house. I called Derek while peeking through the blinds every few seconds, but his call went straight to voicemail. So I decided to call the cops. But before I could dial 911, a loud bang exploded from the kitchen. I screamed. Another bang hit the door hard enough to shake the walls. I ran into the kitchen and saw Ghostface slamming his shoulder into the back door while rain poured on his robe. I backed away crying while he rammed the door again and again. "Leave me alone." "But we're having so much fun." The banging suddenly stopped. For a second, there was nothing except the storm outside. Then I heard a slow, scraping noise against the kitchen window. I looked over and saw the tip of a hunting knife dragging across the glass. The sound made my skin crawl. Suddenly the power went out. Everything went black. I screamed again and nearly dropped my phone. The house became dead silent, except for the rain and my own breathing. Even the refrigerator shut off. The darkness felt heavy and wrong. The lightning flashed outside. For one split second, I saw Ghostface standing directly outside the living room window. Another flash. He was gone. Glass exploded behind me. I turned just in time to see him climbing through the shattered living room window. I ran. I heard his boots slam onto the hardwood floor as he entered the house. At first he didn't even chase me. He just walked slowly through the dark house, laughing in that same creepy, taunting way from the movies. I sprinted down the hallway toward the stairs, but suddenly he charged after me. The sound of his boots pounding across the floor got closer fast. I glanced back once I saw the knife raised in his hand. The mask looked terrifying up close. He swung at me as I turned the corner. The blade missed my throat but sliced through the side of my ear instead. Pain exploded through my head. I collapsed screaming onto the floor while blood poured down my neck. I actually saw the tip of my ear lying on the hardwood floor beside me. Ghostface tilted his head while staring down at me. I kicked him hard in the knee and scrambled away before he could stab me again. He grabbed at my hoodie, but I slipped free and ran into the living room. He chased me around the couch while swinging wildly at me. Every time the knife hit the furniture, sparks flew from the blade. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy ceramic lamp from the side table. When he lunged at me again, I smashed it directly into his face. The lamp shattered. Ghostface screamed and stumbled backwards. Clutching his head, blood poured from beneath the mask. That was the first moment he seemed human, not some movie monster. Just a man who could bleed. I took off upstairs while he cursed and crashed into furniture behind me. I could hear him recovering fast. I locked myself into the bathroom and shoved my body against the door while dialing 911 with shaking hands. Then the pounding started. The entire door shook with every hit. I was sobbing so hard I could barely talk to the dispatcher. Blood kept dripping down my neck and onto the bathroom floor while Ghostface slammed into the door over and over again. At one point he stopped. Complete silence. Then I heard his voice again. Calmer this time. "You know the cops won't get here in time." I genuinely thought I was going to die in that bathroom. Then, outside, I finally heard sirens. The pounding stopped immediately. A minute later, police officers were yelling through the house. When they broke open the bathroom door, I came out shaking so badly I could barely stand. The entire downstairs looked destroyed. Furniture was overturned. Glass covered the floor. Blood was smeared across the hallway walls, but the killer was gone. One of the officers found the back door slightly open. There was blood leading outside into the rain. Not mine. His. The cops investigated the entire property and assured me he's gone. They said he was probably some psycho going nuts before Halloween, and usually there's lesser chance for him to be back. Usually? Yes. I slept that night with the lights on, and my husband's handgun under my pillow. They never found him, but I'm sure he keeps an eye on me. Sometimes in a crowd, I could feel being watched. I was 27 when the court decided I wasn't fit to be a mother. They didn't say it outright, just dressed up in words like history, instability, and risk. But I understood what it meant. My past addiction, something I'd fought hard to overcome, was enough to take my daughter away. 3 years clean, regular rehab meetings, a steady job. None of it mattered. I still lost her. I remember standing there, shaking, as strangers reduced my life to a list of mistakes. A week later, with nothing tying me down, I packed my car and drove to my childhood home in rural Nebraska. The house had been abandoned for years, its peeling paint and sagging porch reflecting exactly how I felt inside. It seemed fitting. Broken things belonged together. Being home alone 24/7 became my thing. All night I would stay awake on the old couch, replaying the courtroom over and over, eventually passing out, crying. Sometime during the night, I woke to the sound of a car pulling up outside. Through the window I saw him. Gary. He had lived next door when I was a teenager. Back then he used to watch me constantly, lingering near his mailbox every morning. Always present, always unsettling. My parents had brushed it off as harmless, but I knew better. He had stalked me. Old fear rushed back instantly. I locked the doors and stayed on edge. But the next morning, when I saw him again, something felt different. He looked older, thinner, almost withdrawn. When our eyes met, he simply nodded and walked away. No staring, no tension. Over the next few days, he kept his distance. I began to question myself. Maybe he had changed. Maybe I was the only one stuck in the past. One night, overwhelmed and drunk, I ran outside to vomit due to the house's bad plumbing. As I collapsed onto the porch, sobbing uncontrollably, everything I had been holding in finally broke loose. My sobbing turned to whimpers, and whimpers turned to loud cries. I was drowning in sorrow when someone called out my name. I turned to the voice, and it was Gary. Only this time, and probably the first time, I saw sadness in his eyes. He hesitated for a second and murmured, I thought, are you alright? Creepy Gary or not, it was the first voice that asked how I was doing. I wiped my eyes and told him the truth, that I'm not. He didn't approach or intervene. He just said he wouldn't mind helping if I ever asked for it. I smiled a little, thinking how wrong I was to judge him so quickly. Maybe he was an oddball. I guess Mom was right. I told him all that night. We sat on the porch for hours, and I kept on talking and crying. He listened to me, like really listened to me. After I was done venting, he consoled me, saying I'm a strong woman. Hence I shouldn't give up so easily. Honestly, it felt good to hear from someone. In my moment of despair, Gary's heartwarming words felt like cooling gel on a third-degree burn. Seeing him in a different light changed my perception about the guy. Feeling obliged and thankful, I asked him if he would like to go in with me and have a drink. I was also tired of drinking alone. I poured him some bourbon Dad had left in the cellar and opened my 6th beer for the night. I asked him how his life is going. He said his mom died and now he lives alone. I felt bad for him. Our conversation was going smoothly enough. I would ask him some questions, and so would he. But soon enough, his questions started to make me feel uncomfortable. He asked me if I missed my husband, and I replied, I don't know, maybe. Suddenly the expression on his face changed. He frowned and stared at me for a minute. The same old creepy stare. Then smirked and said he thinks I don't miss my husband. I miss the intimacy. My heart skipped a beat, and not with a good feeling. I cleared my throat and I told him it's quite late and we should call it a night. But then he leaned closer to me. He locked his eyes on mine and he put his sweaty, warm hands on my cheek like he was caressing me. You know, Ginny, it doesn't have to be this way. You're not alone. We could start over. Together. You could have another chance at being a mom. I could help you with that. Chills ran down my spine. So people don't change? Moms can be wrong too? My God, I have just let them in. I knew if I panicked, things could get worse. So I got up, flashing a fake smile, and said, I need to use the washroom. But before I could even walk past him, he grabbed the knife from the table and pointed it at me. His eyes were now burning with evil desires. He was drooling and mumbling, I want you. I want you. I waited so long. I could see my dooming fate in those eyes. Is he gonna kill me? Or is he gonna do worse? I slowly backed away a few inches from him. I tried telling him that all I need right now is his friendship, and maybe we can think about dating later on. Gary laughed, saying he knows very well that a girl like me will never date a guy like him. Not with a gun at their head. I screamed, saying he's just being paranoid. I do like him, but he wasn't someone easy to be fooled. He slashed the knife, aiming at my head. In such precision, the blade touched my skin, but my shirt ripped off from my shoulder. Before I could run, he jumped on me, and when we landed on the wooden floor, he was pinning my right hand on the floor and trying to kiss me. I was pushing his face away with my left, and we struggled like that for a bit. Suddenly he picked up the knife and tried to stab me. I blocked him with my left hand and saw my pinky finger flying off of it. The knife had slashed it clean. I was writhing on the floor clutching my bleeding hand. Gary stood up confused and terrified and kept apologizing. He said he only wanted to feel me and thought I liked him. At that moment, I understood the guy was out of his mind. He's completely delusional, and I should have gotten a restraining order against him years back. But one thing he was right about is that I am a strong woman. I somehow picked myself up off the floor and ran upstairs. I locked the door and called the cops. When they arrived, Gary was sitting on the floor near the pool of my blood, staring at it with a smile and mumbling, Ginny's mine. She's mine. She'll know. They took him away in handcuffs, and I was rushed to the ER by the paramedics. I have filed for a restraining order, and am still living in my childhood home because that's all I have left to call mine. I don't date. I usually work from home and only go out for groceries. I don't know how long I can be like this, but for some time I really, really want to be alone. Completely alone, because that's even safer than being around people like Gary. My name is Jacob, and I was 13 the first time my parents trusted me to stay somewhere overnight without them. It was my grandpa's house. We had just gotten there that afternoon. The place felt older than anything I'd ever seen. The walls had this faded yellow tint, and everything smelled faintly like dust and something stale. Grandpa seemed normal though, quiet like always. He hugged me when we arrived, patted my back, and asked me how school was. His voice was a little slower than I remembered, but nothing felt off. The only thing my mom said was if Grandpa started sleepwalking, don't panic. Just guide him back to bed. She said it like it was no big deal. At the time, I believed her. It was around midnight when I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. My room was completely dark except for a thin line of light under the door. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. A dragging sound. Slow, heavy. Like someone's feet weren't lifting properly off the floor. Scrape, step, scrape. It was coming from the hallway. I held my breath. "Grandpa," I called out quietly. No response. The sound kept going. Scrape, step, scrape. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to pound. I told myself it was just him, sleepwalking. That's what Mom said. Still, something about it felt wrong. The way the steps dragged. The way they didn't stop. Then my bedroom door creaked. I swear I hadn't locked it. It slowly pushed open on its own. Just a few inches at first. Then more. The hallway light spilled into my room, cutting across the floor, and that's when I saw him. Grandpa, standing there. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were half open, unfocused, like he was staring through me instead of at me. His mouth hung slightly open, his face completely blank. "Grandpa?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, completely still. For a second I thought maybe he'd walk away, but then his lips started moving. At first I couldn't understand what he was saying. It sounded like a whisper, but not normal words, just broken sounds, like he was talking in his sleep. I slowly got out of bed. I stepped closer so I could escort him back to bed. I was right behind him when he suddenly grabbed my wrist. I gasped. His grip was way too strong. It didn't feel like an old man's hand. His head tilted slightly toward me, and for the first time, his eyes focused, right on mine. And in a low, cracked voice, he whispered, "Don't let them in." A chill ran straight through me. "What?" I said. But he didn't repeat it. His grip loosened, and just like that, his face went blank again. He turned and started walking down the hallway. His words echoed in my head. Who was he talking about? People say weird things when they sleepwalk. Maybe that's all it was. But within 10 seconds, someone started knocking violently at our front door. It was so loud, I jumped. My chest tightened. My parents weren't supposed to be back yet. "Hello?" I called out in a shaking voice. But instead of answers, I could only hear the knocks. I slowly walked toward the living room, my legs feeling weak. The house felt different now. The air had dropped 10 degrees. Grandpa was still moving down the hallway ahead of me, heading toward the front door. "Grandpa, wait," I said. He didn't stop. "Don't let them in," he mumbled again, over and over, like he was stuck on it. The knockings got worse, faster, more aggressive. The door rattled with each hit. I reached the living room window and hesitated. I don't know why I looked. I wish I hadn't. There was someone standing outside, right in front of the door, but something about them was wrong. Even in the dark, I could see their posture, back hunched, head tilted, arms hanging loosely at their sides. Exactly like Grandpa, only it wasn't him because my grandpa's eyes glow in the dark, like hyenas. I felt I got stuck inside my nightmare. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there. Then, slowly, it lifted its hand. It knocked again. 3 slow but firm knocks. I noticed Grandpa, who was already holding the doorknob while rocking back and forth like he was possessed. I yelled, panic rising in my chest. I rushed forward and grabbed him, pulling him back. Just when I thought he would end up opening the door, his hands came off the doorknob. He turned his head so roughly in my direction that I could hear a crunch of his bones. His eyes rolled up in his head, revealing the white eyeballs. Never in my life had I sensed danger like that before. For a second, I was blank. I wasn't sure whether I could be safe inside or outside. I gulped in horror, Grandpa was standing right next to a tabletop. My mom has bought fresh flowers and caringly put them on the metal vase seated on top of the table. Grandpa's body jerked violently all of a sudden while foam of spit drooled out the corner of his mouth. I couldn't even scream anymore. It was all happening right in front of my eyes. And before I could even do anything, he picked up the vase, threw the flowers on the floor, and started hitting himself on the head. The first blow made his forehead red. The second made it bleed. And by the third, Grandpa was trembling on the floor due to blood loss from a severely cracked skull. Yes, I watched it all, standing like a statue. Just when I thought it was time to call my parents, or cops, or someone. Anyone living in this block right now would be the ideal thing to do. Grandpa sat up on the floor. He wiped his own blood from his forehead with his palm, then licked it while laughing in a demonic voice. That was my last straw. I ran straight to the kitchen, out the back door, stopping at the neighboring house whom I didn't even know. They called the cops, and the cops called my parents as well as the paramedics. Grandpa died 2 days later in the hospital. The cause of his death was heart failure. He never spoke a single word until his last breath. My parents say Grandpa was struggling mentally and physically since Grandma died, so it was inevitable. But I still feel something. That night, a dark presence entered Grandpa and tried to hurt me, but he took it upon himself to save my life. What do you think?
I got a job at a logistics warehouse this summer after I turned 23. Not glamorous, mostly scanning packages, updating inventory, sitting at a computer in a room that smelled like cardboard and floor cleaner. The hours were rough, 4 in the afternoon to midnight, but the pay was decent, and I needed something to bridge the gap before I figured out what I actually wanted to do with my life. There were maybe 12 of us on the night shift. Most of them were fine. Normal people just doing their jobs. There was one guy, though, a man named Dennis, who I noticed on my first week. He was probably mid-40s, stocky, with this short gray stubble that never seemed to grow or disappear. He worked in the back near the loading dock, so our paths didn't cross much. But every now and then, I'd glance up from my station, and he'd be standing at the far end of the floor, not doing anything, just looking in my general direction. Not staring exactly, just oriented toward me. I figured he was zoning out, tired like the rest of us. I didn't think much of it at the time. The second time something felt off, it was about 3 weeks in. I was on my lunch break in the break room, eating alone because I'd come in early and no one else's break lined up with mine. Dennis came in, poured himself a coffee, and sat down at the table directly across from me, even though every other table was empty. That alone isn't weird. People do that. What was weird was that he didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Just sat there, stirring his coffee slowly, watching me open my sandwich. Then he said, very calmly, "You drive the white car, right? The one with the dent on the passenger side door?" I said yeah. It wasn't weird, I told myself. We all parked in the same lot. He probably just noticed it the same way anyone would. He nodded like I'd confirmed something he already knew. Then he got up and left. He didn't touch his coffee. I told myself it was just small talk, awkward small talk. Warehouse guys aren't always great at conversation, but something about the way he said it, not like a question, more like a statement, sat with me for the rest of the shift. Around week 6, I started noticing my car. Nothing dramatic, just small things that were hard to pin down. Once, I was almost certain I parked closer to the entrance, and when I came out at midnight, my car was further down the lot than I remembered. Another time, the seat felt slightly different, like the position was off by a fraction. Both times I convinced myself I was misremembering. You park in a dark lot at 4 in the afternoon and come back at midnight and your brain fills in gaps. That's normal. I knew that, but I started making a habit of taking a photo of where I parked, just to have a reference. Looking back, the fact I started doing that without admitting to myself why says a lot. About 2 months in, Dennis stopped showing up. I noticed the absence more than I expected to. Not relief exactly. More like that specific unease of waiting for something to finish a sentence that already started. I asked one of the other guys, a loader named Phil, whether Dennis had quit. Phil said he'd been let go, something about attendance, and shrugged like it didn't matter. That same week, I got home from my shift around 12:30, later than usual because we'd had a backlog. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I looked out the back window out of habit, the way you do when it's dark and the light inside makes the glass reflective. But this time, the reflection shifted slightly. I looked harder. There was something at the edge of my yard near the fence. I turned the kitchen light off to see better. A figure, standing completely still. I couldn't make out a face, just a shape. The build of someone stalking, standing between my fence and the tree line. I watched for maybe 30 seconds. The figure didn't move. Then I turned the kitchen light back on, and by the time my eyes adjusted, the space was empty. I didn't sleep well for a few nights after that. I didn't call the police because I couldn't tell them I saw a shape in my backyard that disappeared when I turned a light on. There was nothing concrete to report. Then, 5 days later, I came out to my car before my shift and found something on the windshield. Not a note, not damage. It was a photograph, a printed photo, like from a home printer, slightly glossy. It was a picture of my kitchen window, taken from outside at night. From the angle and what was visible through the glass, it had to have been taken sometime in the last few weeks, because the small plant I'd moved to the counter was in the frame and I'd only moved it recently. I was visible in it too, just barely, a shape at the counter, slightly blurred. I stood in my driveway for a long time looking at that photo. I ended up calling the police that time. They came, took the photo, filed a report, and asked me if I had any idea who might have done it. I told them about Dennis. They said they'd look into it. I never heard back with anything useful. Whoever Dennis was, whatever his last name was, whatever he was doing, it never came to anything official. I transferred to a day shift position at a different location about a month later. I still think about that photograph sometimes. Not because of what it meant he'd been doing, though that's bad enough. What I can't let go of is that in it, I look completely unaware, just standing in my kitchen at night, in my own home, not knowing. That's the part that doesn't leave me. The fact that there's no way to know how many times it happened before the one time he decided to show me. I got the job at a grocery store the summer I turned 19. It was one of those mid-sized chains, not a big box place, not a corner store, just a regular supermarket on the edge of a small town outside Raleigh, where the parking lot was always half empty, and the fluorescent lights hummed loud enough to notice. I worked evenings mostly, 4 p.m. to close, scanning groceries, checking IDs, wiping down the belt between customers. Nothing complicated. Most nights were slow after 8, the kind of slow where you could start counting ceiling tiles. There was a regular who came in maybe 3 or 4 times a week, always in the evening, always within the same 2-hour window. His name was Carl. He told me that himself one night, unprompted, while I was ringing up his groceries. He was maybe 40, quiet, bought the same things almost every visit. Deli meat, a loaf of bread, sometimes a 6-pack. He had this way of standing at the register with his hands flat on the belt, like he was bracing himself, even when there was nothing to brace for. I didn't think much of it at first. Quiet guy, consistent habits. Some people are just like that. The first thing I noticed was that he always ended up in my lane. We had 6 registers. On a slow night, 2 or 3 of us would be open, lights on, no line. Carl would walk the full length of the front end and get in mine. Every time, even when my line was longer, even when the register next to me was completely empty. I told myself he just liked the routine of it. Some customers get attached to a familiar face. It's not uncommon. I'd heard other cashiers talk about their regulars the same way. I didn't dwell on it. The second thing was a comment he made sometime in early October. We were just doing the usual small talk while I scanned his items. He asked if I'd recovered okay from my cold. Casual. Like it was a natural follow-up or something. I hadn't told him I had a cold. I hadn't told anyone at that store, actually. I'd called out one shift the week before, but I texted my supervisor directly. Nothing public, nothing posted anywhere. I kind of laughed it off and said something like, "Yeah, feeling better, thanks." He nodded and paid and left. Normal as anything. But I stood there after he walked out and genuinely tried to work backwards. Had I mentioned it? Had someone else in the store said something to him? I couldn't land on any explanation that fully made sense. I let it go anyway, filed it under things I probably just forgot. By November, I started noticing the timing more carefully, without meaning to. Carl never came in on nights I wasn't scheduled. I only realized this because my coworker Dana mentioned offhand that she'd never seen him before. Dana worked 3 nights a week, always the same 3. We overlapped twice a week. On those nights, Carl came in. On her nights alone, he didn't. She thought it was funny, said he must have a crush on me. We both laughed. I didn't tell her that our schedules weren't posted anywhere customers could see them, that the only way to know when I was working was to either ask someone with access to the system or to show up and check, over and over, for weeks. The 4th thing happened on a Wednesday night in December. I was in the back near the break room, waiting for my shift to start, coat still on, bag over my shoulder. I wasn't on the floor yet. The store was technically open, but I hadn't clocked in. Nobody outside the staff area would have known I was there. I heard my name. Not shouted, not called out, just said, conversationally, at a normal volume, from somewhere near the end of the produce aisle. I stepped out from the back hallway and scanned the floor. Carl was standing by the bagged salads, not looking at me, putting something in his basket. I asked him if he said my name. He looked up, seemed genuinely confused, said he hadn't said anything. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe I misheard. The store wasn't loud, but it wasn't silent either. I clocked in and told myself it was nothing. I thought about it for the rest of the shift. The last thing is the one I have the hardest time sitting with. And it didn't happen at the store. It happened at my house. My last shift was on a Sunday in January. I didn't announce I was quitting. Didn't make a thing of it. Just finished out my shift, turned in my vest, and that was that. My friend Reese had picked me up that night. We drove back to my place together, came in through the front door laughing about something stupid that had happened at work. She went to the kitchen to grab water while I headed upstairs to change out of my uniform. I pushed my bedroom door open and reached for the light switch. There was someone behind my dresser. I didn't fully process it at first. It was just a shape, a dark mass that didn't belong, pressed into the narrow gap between the dresser and the corner wall. And then it moved, stood up, and I saw his face for just a fraction of a second before every instinct I had kicked in at once. Carl. I screamed, turned and ran. I got down the stairs so fast I nearly fell, grabbed Reese by the arm, and we were out the front door before either of us said a single word. We sat in her car with the doors locked, shaking for what felt like a long time. The police came. They walked through the whole house. By the time they got upstairs, the room was empty. Window at the far end of the hallway was open. Screen was pushed out. They found no one. I moved out within the week, stayed with Reese while I found somewhere else. Filed a report, gave them Carl's name, his description, everything I could remember. Nothing came of it. No charges, no arrest, no explanation for how he'd gotten in or how long he'd been there before we arrived. And then, about 6 weeks later, I was back in that part of town for an unrelated errand. I wasn't planning to go anywhere near the store. I just happened to drive past it. I slowed down at the light next to the parking lot and glanced over without thinking. Carl was standing outside the entrance, not going in, not coming out, just standing near the cart return, facing the doors, completely still, like he was waiting for someone to walk through them. I hadn't worked there in 6 weeks. He had no way of knowing my schedule anymore. There was no reason for him to be there waiting unless he didn't know I was gone. The light turned green. I drove away and I didn't look back. Here's the part I keep returning to, even now. That October night when Carl asked about my cold, the cold I never mentioned to anyone at work. At the time I wrote it off as a coincidence I couldn't explain. But after what happened in January, after seeing him crouch behind that dresser in my bedroom, I understood what the explanation actually was. He already knew I'd been sick, because he'd already been inside my house. I worked the overnight shift at a small family-owned motel off a 2-lane highway. It's the kind of place that gets hunters in the fall, and the occasional long-haul trucker who doesn't want to push through to the next town. I've been doing nights there for about 2 years. Most of the time, it's quiet enough that I could go the whole shift without seeing a single person. And that's exactly how I like it. The setup is pretty standard. Front desk, small lobby, a vending machine, and a door behind the desk leading to a back room where I spend most of my time. Maybe 22 rooms along one floor, an L-shaped building wrapping around the parking lot. I know the sounds of that place the way you know sounds in your own house. Ice machine cycles on around 1 a.m. The exterior lights buzz when it's cold. The side door sticks and scrapes when it opens. Normal stuff. The thing that started all of it was so small I almost didn't register it. It was a Wednesday night, around 1:30 in the morning. I was doing my hourly walkthrough when I passed room 9 and noticed the Do Not Disturb sign hanging on the handle. I was pretty sure room 9 wasn't occupied. I checked the system at the desk. Vacant, cleaned and ready. I figured housekeeping forgot to pull it when she turned the room over. I didn't think much of it at the time. About an hour later, I was in the back room eating a sandwich when I heard a door close. Not a slam, just a quiet click. The kind you hear when someone is trying not to wake anyone up. I listened. Nothing followed. No footsteps. No voices. I told myself it was probably a guest coming in from a smoke, or the side door latch not catching in the wind. Easy explanation. I went back to my sandwich. Close to 4 a.m. I did another walkthrough. When I passed room 9, there was a strip of yellow light under the door. Just the faint glow of a bedside lamp. I stopped and stood there for a good 10 seconds. Then I went back and checked the system again. Still vacant. No walk-ins. No key issued. I stood at the desk running through explanations. Housekeeper left a lamp on. Maintenance came through and didn't log it. I almost convinced myself. Then I thought about the Do Not Disturb sign and the sound of that door clicking shut, and my neck went tight. I grabbed the spare key and walked the hall slowly. Outside room 9, I could hear the television. Low, barely audible. Like someone had turned it down for company. I knocked and said maintenance. Nothing. Knocked again. Nothing. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. Lamp on. TV on. Tuned to local news. Volume nearly all the way down. The bedspread was slightly wrinkled on one side, like someone had been sitting on it. Bathroom door open. Light off. Empty. I checked anyway. Nobody there. I turned everything off, pulled the door shut, and walked back to the desk. I didn't sleep the rest of the shift. I told myself it was a system glitch, that someone had used the room earlier in the week and it hadn't updated properly. I almost believed it, but the following Wednesday, the day shift woman mentioned casually that she'd found the TV on in room 9 when she opened it for a guest. She laughed about it, said she thought it was a ghost. I smiled and didn't say anything. That same night around 2 a.m., I heard the ice machine cycle on at the end of the hall. Normal. Then underneath it, footsteps, slow and unhurried, moving toward the lobby. I looked at the hallway feed on the monitor. Empty. But the footsteps kept coming. And then they stopped just outside the door behind my desk. The door I keep propped open, 6 feet to my left. I turned and looked at it. Empty doorway, dark hallway. Then I heard it, barely audible, a slow exhale in the dark just beyond the door. Patient, controlled, like whoever it was had been standing there a while and wasn't in a hurry. I should have called someone. Instead, I got up, walked to the doorway, and shined my phone flashlight down the hall. Nothing. I told myself it was an air duct and went back to the desk. That was my second mistake. A few weeks later, same shift, same dead quiet around 2 a.m. I heard the side door scrape open and then scrape again, like someone let it fall shut and reopened it slowly. I walked to the desk, empty hallway. I decided to do a walkthrough. Part of me wanted a real explanation more than I wanted to be careful. I passed room 7 and room 8. When I got to room 9, the Do Not Disturb sign was on the handle again. Housekeeping had been through since the afternoon. I hadn't put it there. I stood holding it in my hand, staring at the door. Then I opened it from the inside. He was already moving when it swung open. He hit me hard in the chest with both hands before I could step back, and I went down on the hallway floor. The flashlight skidded away. I couldn't breathe. I just lay there trying to get air back into my lungs. He stepped over me. I caught maybe 2 seconds of him. Tall, lean, dark jacket, hood down. His face was calm. He looked down at me the way you look at something that mildly inconveniences you. Then he reached down and closed his hand around my throat. Not squeezing, just resting it there, letting me feel the weight of it. He held that for 4 or 5 seconds. Then he let go, stepped over me, and walked to the side door. I heard it scrape open and shut. The police came and searched the lot and the road. Nothing. One officer asked if anything had been stolen. Nothing had. Room 9 was undisturbed except for the bedspread, wrinkled on one side. Same as that very first night. Nobody could explain what he wanted. He'd been coming back to that room for weeks, not stealing anything, not bothering guests, just being there. And when I finally got close enough, he didn't run. He put his hand around my throat and looked at me like he was deciding something. I still don't know what he decided. I transferred to a different property after that, day shift. But I still think about the way he looked down at me. Calm, like he'd done it before, like he had every intention of doing it again.